for appearing this morning. While you say that you haven't studied the bill, your comments tell us slightly a different story. You seem to understand it quite well. Can I just, about voter fraud, you mentioned in the UK there was something like 13 cases. You didn't say the word jail, but they were pretty severe apparently, and others not as severe but yet charged. And now you have proof of identity. I want you to expand on this, and I'll go on and ask my other questions, and you can do that. Casual voucher approval, I think I have you correctly quoted, casual voucher approval undermines the strength of the election process. And secondly, in testimony last evening, we heard from a lawyer who has had considerable experience in election cases. And he said that the ingredients for fairness in voting or effective voting is that these ingredients be there: fairness, integrity, and transparency. And this morning, you added another, and I think I'd like for you to expand on this: accuracy, the accuracy of the vote. Change is always a challenge if we were to do away with the voucher system. Could you comment on any suggestions as to how we could be proactive to educate those in the minority groups or less likely individuals to vote? If you could expand on how we may be able to educate those. And finally, I just wanted to say this. Via the BBC, we sometimes see your parliament in action, and they beat up on one another quite well. We do the same here, and that is our way of getting effective and proper and correct legislation. But in the end, we all shake hands and we all accept it. So, but could you give me your comments on those points?
Well, if I could start at the end, I was attacked in the House of Commons by the former Minister of Justice, who talked about my so-called research being much in need of peer review. I then spoke to his political advisor, who said, "Oh, you don't want to take any notice of that. That's mere parliamentary knockabout. In fact, he very much values your advice." And he then asked me to run a cross-party seminar on the bill that he was introducing. And so I'm pleased in a way to hear that I shouldn't take too much notice of what have been some tough things that have been said across the floor recently. What happened in Britain was that after the tough things in public, the officials of different parties and experts from different parties and electoral administrators did get together in private to have cross-party discussion about some of the technical details. And I can't help feeling that with a bill that is so complex as the one that is before you, that a lot of the divisions that seem to be huge gulfs of principle will be actually quite easily solved with technical discussion. And that, I think, leads on to the answer to your question, that if, for example, you have the groups that Mr. Neufeld and Mr. Meron were saying could be disadvantaged, which I understand were old people, students, and First Nation members in particular, I think that there already are efforts made by Elections Canada before an election, for example, to go into an old age home to make sure that the lists are up to date. What doesn't happen is that after those visits, there isn't a special voter card given that a person who doesn't have a proof of address can then bring into the polling station. They only have the voter information card, which has certain disadvantages to it. So I think that you could quite easily devise a special form of card that has come when electoral officials have visited the old age home, when they've been in the First Nations area, on student campuses, that will allow people to vote, and that it won't take too long with the officials together and people from different parties to devise a way that a sensible substitute for vouching will be possible. I'm confident that it will.
Okay, thank you. Senator Batters.
Thank you very much for testifying before our committee today from such a distance, and we appreciate you taking time out of your busy life to do so and help us understand your point of view more. I was interested to hear you in your opening comment. I thought that this was a very crucial part of what you said. When you said, I am not sufficiently aware of the living conditions of many members of Canadian First Nations to be able to suggest how best they may be provided with proof of identity and address, which they will then be able to present when they visit polling stations. The end of vouching must be accompanied by and be conditional upon an adequate scheme to provide them and members of other disadvantaged groups with up-to-date proof of identity. And I wasn't sure if you were aware, there are 39 forms of identification, and a number of those actually are specifically targeted to some of those traditionally disadvantaged groups. So some of those are an attestation of residence issued by the responsible authority of a First Nations band or reserve. So rather than vouching, where it's people are only able to vouch for one particular person, in that sort of a case, the appropriate official on a First Nations band or reserve would be able to list all of the different people on their reserve who live, and that's the proof then of their residence, is being on that particular list. And there's similar types of lists, which can be an attestation of residence, letter of stay, admission form, or statement of benefits that can be issued from the responsible authority of a shelter, soup kitchen, student residence, senior residence, or long-term care facility. And in my view, that would be what you're speaking about here when you're talking about an adequate scheme to provide them and these members of disadvantaged groups with an up-to-date proof of identity. So I'm wondering if you have any comment on that. And I also thought it was important when you were responding to my colleague Senator Baker, when you talked about there needs to be a balance between the two, reasonable safeguards of the integrity of the electoral system so that we can show that they are who they say they are. That's what a good democracy is, and then balanced with an inclusive nature. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Thank you very much. About First Nations, I have only been able to read in to what has been said. And I think that there have been, and I have made one or two inquiries with those in the know as well. And as I understand it, certainly Mr. Neufeld's objection, when I think a colleague of yours brought out some of the 39 forms of identification, was that he said they weren't valid because they didn't have address on it. And as I understand it, one of the problems that those who are making objections are bringing forward is that certain forms of identification aren't useful given the rule about addresses. Now, so I don't know. Now, you're saying that maybe that is not a valid objection. I just can't tell.
Right.
I mean, if there are valid ways already, well and good. Mm-hmm. But I think everybody needs to be satisfied. And there's been enough concern expressed about whether those 39 forms do work. to make me feel that the matter needs to be looked at further. So I think that would be my first reaction. The second is that I gather that, for example, the Indian status card, and I was speaking to an official about this, that you could live, he told me, in downtown Montreal and have an Indian status card, that the status card and the address are not the same thing. On the other hand, the list of persons living on a reservation brought up by the officials of the reservation would be a collective document, and each individual person wouldn't have a copy of that. And so I think you'd need, if they're to go to a polling station and to say, I live on that reservation and I'm not somebody with a First Nation status living in Montreal, you'd need a personal card from the administrator, and it said that it's not given at the moment. And so I think you'd have to look to make sure that the system works in practice. And I think you'll be able to do that. But you do need to do that so everybody's satisfied.
Right, and actually, sir, with respect to the statement of attestation you were just referring to, I think the way that it typically works is the elections officials at those particular polling stations that would be appropriate for those First Nations reserves have those statements of attestations there, rather than every particular person having to bring it in, because there may be a list of 100 and some people on these types of lists. So that's how the system works. I know I live in the province of Saskatchewan. We have a similar system that was just used in the 2011 election in Saskatchewan I think they used almost identical, the same types of identification that were that are under the federal system, and a similar situation was used there, and that was certainly a widespread used way of people on First Nations reserves being able to prove their residency, because yes, some of those 39 types of ID are only applicable to proof of identity, but there are a number of them, in particular those attestations of residence, that are applicable to show a person's residence. I also wanted to ask you about, so Senator Baker was earlier talking about the right to vote, and certainly a very fundamental right under our system in Canada. But I would submit that that's accompanied by the very reasonable obligation to prove that you are who you say you are, as you indicated today. And in Canada, that includes not only identity, but residence is a very important part of that as well under our system. And we now have about 18 months before the next election. We have a fixed term election, and that's going to be in October of 2015, right? And so there's plenty of time, I would submit, for if people don't have any of these 39 types of identification, there's 18 months where they can, work to getting one of those pieces of ID. In the meantime, there's a lot of time to organize their affairs to be able to do that, whether that's getting, if it's a student, correspondence issued by a school, college, or university, they have time to make those types of things. And I guess what I'm asking is, would you agree that that's a reasonable obligation so that we have, as you referred to earlier, a common sense, robust answer to this issue?